Good afternoon, everybody here in Asia, and good morning to everybody over there in Europe. And welcome to our webinar. My name is Trev West. I am with Capitable Limited, Hong Kong. Brief introduction about us. Founded in 2018. We focus on cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies. We're experts in capital raising. Most recently, we've entered into agriculture and aquaculture and fine art. Now with me today, this afternoon, I wish to introduce our esteemed guest, Mr. Djiang Chan. The topic for today will be the industry of seaweed growing, the business of seaweed growing, the science of seaweed growing, specifically within the family of what we call Cottonii. So, Mr. Djiang Chen, can you please introduce yourself? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Yeah, my name is Djiang Chan, and basically I'm from USA, but I lived across in Singapore and then USA and then China and then now in Indonesia the recent 4 years. Basically, I'm specializing in the sustainable aquaculture area, and hence the seaweed and the Cottonii farming in Indonesia. Okay. Okay. Tress, yeah.
Alrighty. So great. Let us now get into the next slide. So yes, in addition to what you've just said, I just want to stress that Mr. Djiang Chen's company, PT Urban Farms, is quite expansive in what they do, including the sourcing of fish. For example, several years back when Jiang and I had actually started chatting on LinkedIn to learn more, he was very busy during the pandemic with some various and very surprising requests for his company, such as sourcing coconuts, sourcing betel nuts. There's a lot of things that happened during the pandemic where Jiang was basically asked on behalf of his clients to go further upstream, if you will, to find the Indonesian products, and of course at wholesale. So specifically for today's discussion, it was something over the last few years that Jiang has been pursuing, and it's been a labor of love, learning a lot. So now that we've discussed the team, shall we move on to this? Is it possible for you to explain the difference between these two species? I understand you're growing both, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So basically, Kappaphycus alvarezii, that's more or less the chocolate brownish red color seaweed. And then there's the other one, which is the Eucheuma cottonii. That's more of the green one. And basically, it depends on different parts of Indonesia where it just happens to be, culturally speaking, where they tend to focus on which of the two species grows better, and then they tend to focus on that particular species. But in the market sphere, in the commercial sector, it's all the same price. It's regarded as just quote unquote, we just say Cottonii, Carrageenan seaweed. Okay, so some places basically on the Eucheuma cottonii, which is the green ones, that tends to be farmed in the bi-coastal areas. And then for the Kappaphycus alvarezii, the red-brown ones, that tends to be farmed in mostly bay areas where there are not so much waves. And it's just the way the differential seaweed adapts better, I suppose. But it's not 100% representative. It's just, you can still find, in bi-coastal, where there's coastal communities where they're actually farming the red and the green ones. So it's just a matter of preference and, what the farmers' luck has been, I suppose, in the farming sector over the last, 5-10 years or even more, I suppose.
Got
Okay.
it. Got it. So, with that introduction, let us now, before we go back to the science and the art of growing, let us specifically talk for a few minutes on this slide, which is the business model, if you will, in Indonesia. So, you can see on this slide, it's talking about meat products, desserts and sweet sauces, pharmaceuticals, fish foods, dairies, juices, cosmetics, pet food, shrimp food. So the business play would be that from Indonesia, we're exporting to mainland China. Is that correct?
Correct. 85% of all the seaweed that's farmed in Indonesia, when we talk about the Cottonii, is dominated by export into China for value-added processing into some of the products that you just mentioned on the downstream level. Yeah?
Right. Yeah. So I've been researching on all of the potential usages, right? So, for example, on this slide, it talks about pork, specifically probably in China where there's a lot of pork, and then
Right.
fish cutlets. So I didn't realize that there was such an additive even within seafood such as fish cutlets that the carrageenan could be added, but that's certainly surprising. So that would also be a mainland China play. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, not necessarily they produce the meat cutlets and or the seafood cutlets there, but it's the ingredient that's used for the industry that does this kind of additive that's added to some of the fish or meat steaks these days that's sold globally.
But that if we could just basically ask you then, the average mainland Chinese buyer of a shipping container full of Cottonii would be using for what? Is it for pork? Is it for sausages or for what specifically?
Well, because it's actually just simply dried here for like 3 days, right? And then it's back into those rice sacks, and then they're just loading it up on the container and then ship it to China. So it's actually being value-added processed into carrageenan powder. So then from there on out, it's the varying different industries that need it, and a lot of it's actually exported, but a lot of it's actually being used domestically in China because of the population that they have there, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. One other question then for that is that we're talking about shipping it. The processing of the carrageenan is done domestically in Indonesia, or is that done by the end client in China?
They have a few downstream processors here. One of the larger Chinese companies have installed their value-added downstream processing here, but predominantly still it's 85% is still exported, and then value-added process over in China.
Gotcha.
But they also have some local players, but not too much.
Gotcha. Okay, so for this slide, just wanted to talk to you about sort of the very, very strong future projections. These was done by several research companies. This is basically an extrapolation. If we look out to the year 2032, it's a near doubling over about 15 plus years. So this is really just more of the business side of the equation, of the fact that the global demand for carrageenan, which is derived from the raw product of seaweed, is growing, and of course North Asia or East Asia is going to be the largest marketplace. So do you have anything to add to that observation?
I think just in a more recent example, due to the wars that's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and the fertilizer have skyrocketed upwards. So there's a growing new demand, and then plus, of course, the industry is looking for more sustainable uses of fertilizers. So one of the biggest growing, fastest growing seaweed applications is actually for the biostimulant. It's basically taking carrageenan and then they process it into a sort of like a liquid-based biostimulant to create a more sustainable agricultural yield. And it actually does help perform better while actually reducing the environmental impact. So that's definitely a growing demand, especially in countries like Brazil, where it's a big agri powerhouse. nation, and then of course other countries as well.
Stimulant. Did not know that. It's good to know. Okay, so we should make a note of that. So I would like to connect the dots on the fact for macroeconomic events such as military conflicts. Okay, moving on though, let us move on to the next slide, which is talking now specifically about Indonesia. This was a few years back, just the sort of regions across Indonesia, the provinces of Indonesia, and then the bottom part of the slide speaking to price per kilogram projections, which is priced in local Indonesian rupiah. Some of it's, of course, projected and forecasted out on the far right side. But can you comment on this, the growing geography and the market prices?
If you look at the map on the top there, where it has a red focus, the bigger the focus, red dot, I guess it's a more intense growing region. So we'll call that whole section where there are big yellow spots, they're actually called East Indonesia, and it's more underdeveloped. So there's a lot of excess of ocean, coastal cities and whatnot. So the government of Indonesia is promoting to do more seaweed farming on the east of Indonesia. But that being a good thing, there's also you gotta balance out the sometimes difficult logistics that occur in Indonesia, and so the further east. Theoretically, it can be a little bit less expensive, but when you add up all the logistical expenses, then it might come up to be the same. But overall, in general, it's predominantly in the Sulawesi, and then you have some more all the way up east to Papua, and then all the way down to NTT, which is in the southern east part of the entire Indonesia. Right. And they have good growing areas because of the water temperature and the condition of the ocean, and all that put together. It's more conducive for farming on a massive scale over on that side.
Gotcha. Okay. So let us go to the next little bit here. So now these are actually something that you can speak to personally. We have a few questions here, a few prepared questions. So question number one, can you speak to the challenges and the problems looking out for in growing the Cottonii?
I think the biggest challenge is not being able to predict what tomorrow and next week is weather is going to be, and there's just a multitude of different conditions that you have to deal with Mother Nature. It's the one thing that makes it extremely difficult. Not only we're talking about Mother Nature and the ups and downs, the weather, temperature, and the erratic temperatures, but also you have like predation. Different months of the year, you may have the rabbit fish, which is a herbivore that tends to they eat the Cottonii or the seaweeds that when you're farming. So you just got to be like privy and cautious about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then occasionally when you're farming, even though that we say in a smaller, remote, not so heavily trafficked area, but you do have some of the smaller boats that sometimes do leak fuel, right? So that's a pollution which you absolutely do not want it touching and contaminating your farm. So that's why you have to be cognizant about when you farm, it needs to be submerged down maybe about 20 centimeters so that to avoid any oil spill that may be coming over to your farm. That's sort of little details that need to be put a lot of attention to, and then work with, I suppose.
All right. The next question we have here regarding your operations is, can you please elaborate on rope farming versus non-rope farming for the species?
Rope farming has been predominantly consistent with Indonesia and pretty much around the world. What we at Urban Farms have been trying to do is to do away with the rope-based farming. And so what you can see from some of the photos, we actually have a net pen. And then so we take the seed and we actually just pretty much drop it into the net pen, and we kind of like maintain it and watch it grow. And so we can, accomplish a few things. So one is avoid predation, and two, we can actually increase the performance and production in terms of mass volume by using net pens. And then also when you talk about seeing some of the photos, you can see the sun. What we call them paranets, which is like a sunshade. The added shading actually cools down the water temperature underneath the net pans, which give it a more consistent temperature to avoid it being too warm. Because if it gets too warm, then the thallus edges become white, and then they start to die off. So you got to manage it pretty well. And of course, if you use rope base, the efficiency is lower, and it takes a lot more space to cover the farming area grounds, and it's just the output is just not the best, I guess. But traditionally, that's the so-called easiest and lowest cost way of doing things. But we realized that when we use the net pen, when we look at the salaried employee per month and the efficiency output, they can actually manage more of the net pen farms versus rope-based farming, and the efficiency goes up. So therefore, the price of the product goes down, and so I suppose then we make there's more profit on the bottom line. Basically, that's what it means.
Right. Yeah. The next question was going to be specifically about capex versus opex, and I think you've already just mentioned that. So to drive that, is there some sort of raw or rough figure numbers of the difference between net pen and rope strategy for you?
I think talking about the OPEX, we're probably about 20% less than rope-based farming, 20 to 25%, somewhere in there. For CAPEX on the front end, we're a little bit more expensive, but but even when we say it's more expensive, we're really just, using net pans with stakes into the ocean ground, and then we have it anchored to the bottom. So it's not really a huge differential in terms of CAPEX. We're not using ropes, but we're using net pens. So we're using fish nets, so to say. So yes, it does cost more, and then of course you have the sunshades. But overall, it's CAPEX is definitely higher, but not much higher.
Okay. Let us then have just a little bit of an overarching question here on the potential and the future of Cottonii, or the species as a whole that you've been growing for your project. So do you want to just quickly give a little bit of a future projection of what the industry looks like with what you're doing, or maybe your competitors? How do you feel is the market going to be in the next 1-2 years?
Seaweed in general is obviously one of the most sustainable ocean farming, to say, that can be done. And of course, the world is talking about carbon credits and whatnot. Overall, I think the demand for carrageenan-based products being applied to different aspects, or even more newer industries, will be growing. And there's the world is actually going to be using more, not less, for sure. And I think the world just hasn't realized over the last 30 to 50 years that Cottonii farming, which is carrageenan, is actually a very commonly used product in your everyday products, from lotion to shampoos to yogurts to paint and even filtering beer. That there's going to be more of those products being developed, and even on the artificial meat-based products that they're using bioreactors, that most likely the media going to be used is actually going to be seaweed carrageenan-based products. So as one would expect, that the industry will be sustainably growing in demand. And so I think the world needs, that's why the world, in general speaking, from Latin America to Africa continents to in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia, a lot of people is actually focused on trying to expand the farming and developing more sustainable products.
Gotcha. Okay. So that also, you mentioned, sustainability and carbon emissions. So let me ask for the follow-on question then. The government, and in your case it's Indonesia, are the local governments or the federal government or even provincial government offering subsidies or grants or something similar for initiatives?
Indonesia as a nation has always been very welcoming in reaching out to the making a social impact in terms of generating income. And one of the most welcome product in the 17 plus thousand islands in Indonesia for local government is to promote seaweed farming and more sustainable aquaculture, fish or related farming practices to help spur more income for the local coastal communities. And Indonesia in of itself is also ripe and very conducive for farming seaweed. Indonesia as a country has probably, aside from Canada, has the highest coastal mileage per se.
Right.
So, and access to farming for seaweed. Indonesia's tropical climate is almost a one season kind of climate weather that you can have more all year round consistent farming with some adjustments in terms of the rainy season and non-rainy season. But overall, Indonesia has proven over its course of the last 30, 50 years that seaweed farming has been happening and it's not stopping and it's going to grow. And the government, from the government to the coastal community, especially the government today, is very green lighting all seaweed related sustainable aquaculture practices across Indonesia. So that's a good thing, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, I certainly, I think when it comes from the investment angle, I know that one of the other points that you wanted to really address was the in addition to grants, the feasibility of doing business in Indonesia. So if you are there, your microphone is off and your camera's off.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you talk? Okay, sorry. Can you talk about the feasibility of doing business? I do believe that the contention or the friction or the pushback we get from non-Indonesians when we're talking about doing business in Indonesia is they're just really sort of scared or they just don't know. And in that regard, can you talk about how business has changed, how it's become easier, or can you talk about how to demystify and debunk some stereotypes?
I believe that Indonesia, as a country in the face of many foreigners, they pretty much quote unquote sort of like they understand Bali as this tropical bliss paradise vacation place. But Indonesia is obviously an ultra wealthy, resource rich nation, whether it's the minerals that they have, all the way to the ocean, marine biota. And so I think, and then of course, with its culture, it's a Muslim predominant culture here. Most Westerners may be a little bit hesitant, but actually Indonesia has opened up an awful lot and has welcomed, and a lot of companies are actually entering Indonesia, and they see Indonesia as a potential marketplace that to come in and plant their businesses here. And when we talk about the consumer market, yes, while the GDP per capita is still low, it does have a strong young workforce, right? And then they also have roughly about 285 million population here. So Indonesia definitely is a country that should be expanding rapidly and growing rapidly, and then also not only to produce more value-added products and then produce more made in Indonesia products here, and also the domestic consumption is actually growing as well too here.
Got it. Yeah. One other question that we have here is actually on. It's kind of going back to capex and opex, but there's been other companies out there between Philippines and Indonesia, wherever, even India, when it comes to the scalability of harvesting seaweed. So do you have anything to add when it comes to the mechanization or robotics or any sort of engineering that helps harvest or farm in a saltwater environment, given the fact that saltwater is very corrosive?
I think, can there be some mechanization? Yes. But at the stage right now, I think because of the labor rates, it's hard to justify the capex when the labor rates are still fairly low in Indonesia. I think over in the coming years, when you farm in a sheer volume and you need to mechanize and gain more efficiency through time and when you do and the way you harvest and process, sure, yes. But at the moment in Indonesia, there is no one single farm that commands a huge volume production yearly. I think in Indonesia it's pretty much very fragmented, and so yeah, it's still probably a few years out before an entity actually comes and puts together a massive farm and does an amazing job and then applies the mechanization. And then when they apply mechanization, then they probably will go downstream and set up shop here, and so they can be producing carrageenan and other related products that's for the industry.
So I have a question just while we're on it, because I know that the more that you and I have been talking about your adventures. So yeah, between Western Indonesia and Central Indonesia, and then the Eastern Islands of Indonesia, and then also on the local government level, there's been certain those large blue tubes, right? Those barrels and the floating platforms. Can you speak to the difference of the depth of the water, how the depth of the water affects it, or how far from shore?
You're talking about when you do the farming, right?
Yeah, because I know that what you've been updating in LinkedIn, because you're a very prolific LinkedIn poster, is that between what you saw in Bali over in NTT, and then now some of your operations over in Java, the depth of the water, is that matter? For example, I see now with the photos you provided, that's really kind of shallow water. So you cannot grow Cottonii if it's too deep, or what?
No, you can grow it if it's in deeper waters. I guess the one single easiest way to describe where not to farm is if you look, as a consumer, we look at very pristine tropical bliss, ultra white sand bed ocean, where the water is extremely turquoise and even. So if you look at the bottom being that's all sandy bottom and has no other plant growth in the bottom of the ocean, then that's probably not a good place to farm seaweed. So typically when we look for ideal seaweed farmable locations, then on the bottom side of it, on the bottom ocean base, then there's other seaweed related wild seaweed that's actually growing there, right? So the analogy is that if any other seaweed doesn't grow there in its natural state, then don't farm seaweed there, because it's probably a combination of the currents are not suitable, or because it's extremely white and it gets too warm because of the sun reflection, the sunlight reflection, and there's a combination of stuff. Of course, if you can farm it in 5-8 meter water, it's not an issue. And if you're doing it on a rope or maybe on a floating net pen, it's just a matter of you have a bigger OPEX, because you have to get on a boat to get out further into 5-8 meter depth water, right, to operate the farm, basically, as opposed to like, for example, looking at this photo here, our guys are actually just walking on waist high water, which is near shore, and it's also a safer place to work with, right? Because it's within the inlet area. so there's no waves there. And so yeah, we try to do a combination in finding the best location, safe location, and somewhere where if there's any issues, we can always go down into the ocean water throughout the whole day to investigate and check on the farm.
And can you speak to this photo here? This is something that I know you've discussed earlier about these nets. So how is this going so far, these trials?
This is just something that one of the China clients asked us to implement and do a trial, and where they're using ropes, and then we put them in a net, sort of like bag, and then we put a seed in there, and then let it, and you know, and the photo there on the left there, it's on a long rope, right? And then the one on the right just shows what's the actual close-up view of it, and it works out fine. It works out fine. It's just from an OPEX point of view, it's more tedious to set up those tie wraps and tie up on a rope and create the small nets that you can actually let the seaweed grow further and bigger. Grow bigger. But it works out okay. It does well. It's just we don't see a huge benefit, except that maybe if you're in a location where you're farming in the rainy season, where the waves are a little bit more active or much bigger, and then they kind of tend to break off the seed, Cottonii, and then you have some complete losses. With this setup, you can be assured that you're not losing anything in its entire growth cycle.
Yeah.
So there's pro and con to everything, I guess. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I can see that with some of your former posts, you were, sending a lot of and posting a lot of photos on rope farming. But when it, like you said, whether it's Eastern Indonesia or even over towards the western part of Indonesia, if there's going to be heavy waves, or if it's the time of year where the waves are strong and the wind is strong, and you're using just rope farming and you're tying each seed stock to the rope, there's going to be losses, right? There's going to be maybe sometimes
Correct.
it can be quite large.
Correct. Yeah, you could lose almost more than half of what you're tying onto a 50-meter length rope, and we have every 20 to 25 centimeter you're putting a seed stock there, and in some instances in the heavy rain season, when the waves start to come, then yeah, they definitely could easily break off. Sometimes all of it. Sometimes they even break off the entire rope, and they're just it's just the power of Mother Nature and the waves that we don't really realize how powerful they are. So that's why we are trying to develop other means, more sustainable means. And the coastal community, whether they use rope or net pens, I guess when we talk about in the spirit of business, whether it's us or the coastal community farming, they need to be able to adapt, right, in different varying conditions, so that they have a continuity and sustaining the family and the livelihoods, and not being washed away or have their products damaged, and then to the point where they can't actually feed themselves. That's pretty detrimental, right? Whether it's Indonesia or any other third world nation.
That's right. So I was talking, I think I kind of told you recently at a recent conference, talking to some PhD folks that have studied this from a sort of socioeconomic perspective, and there's sort of market cycles, there's microcycles and macrocycles, and there's seasonal cycles for growing. But when it comes to a whole community, or a whole sort of coastal community, depending disproportionately, right, a large percent of coming from their seaweed harvest, and they have a bad harvest, can really lead to some very tense infighting, and perhaps even some friction on the local village level, just because everybody's feeling the same pain at the same time. And that's something that's almost, in Mother Nature's hand, right?
Right. And then sometimes, when the temperature is too hot, and then they die off, they get the white edges on the thallus ends, and then they die off. So they completely destroy their seed stock. So then they don't have any more seed stock. So pretty
wow.
much they're dead in the water unless the local governments actually give them a handout and help them out with some seeds. But even at that,
Wow.
Indonesia does support some handout, free support subsidy on some of the seed stock, but the volumes are too little for a family to justify, and it will take maybe 3, 4, 5 months before they can actually build enough seed stock from there on out to sustain. So it's very difficult, and so they have to almost do other things meanwhile while
Mm,
farming seaweed. And also another thing about Indonesia is when they do the subsidy and they don't provide enough seed stock, a lot of families
mm,
cannot focus on the farming alone because they can't survive profitably.
right.
So then you have a non-focus centric, you're partially doing farming, right? And then you're partially maybe becoming a fisherman, and then you catching the fish of the day, and so you have to like juggle between the two. So the care in the farming is not as detailed, and that's what's happening on a very, very local coastal community level, which is not really being addressed properly.
Yes. Um, yeah. That's something. Yeah. It's hard to save money when you have so little money to go around. And it can't always go back to the government to solve those problems. So you mentioned
Right.
seed stock, and in your experience over these last few years, when you're going through seed stocks, the life cycle for your Cottonii or the Cottonii sister species. So is it the maximum amount of sort of trimming and putting back into the water is how many months or how many cycles?
When we do seed stock expanding, so basically you grow the seaweed for roughly about 15 days, 15 to 20 days, and then you trim it off, and then you
Mm,
create more seeds. And then you kind of like go through the iteration over and over again until you have enough seed stock. And then from there on out, you can leave it out there for about 30 to 45 days. I
right.
think in general, when Indonesia does the rope farming, they tend to put it out there for like about 45 days. When in fact,
Right.
it actually peaks at about 30 days, and then it starts to, uh, taper off, and the growth cycle on a daily growth doesn't grow as fast as between the first and the 30th day. So, but then again, of course, we understand that a lot of the farmers, when they do rope farming, because of the OPEX, they don't want to be harvesting every 30 days and then taking a portion of the harvest and then retying them onto the seed, a new seed stock, and then putting them out there. So
Gotcha.
when you do that, you're getting for every 45 days. So in theory, you're getting roughly about 7 times harvest. They give or take a year. So unless you're doing enough volume, it's not very conducive for a family to survive and live off the seaweed only, unless they really got their stuff together and they're doing higher rope count and higher seed stock count, therefore
Gotcha.
higher harvest.
Understood. Okay. We have a few more questions here, also from the audience.
Sure.
Um, just real quick then, when we're talking, because some people are obviously, most people don't know a lot about seaweed. So could you just detail when it comes to this species versus other species, cold water versus hot water seaweed farming, summarize?
I think the easiest cold water seaweed we can describe is when the consumer eats sushi, and so they have the kombu, right? They have that seaweed that's pretty much used for the seaweed industry, in its bulk sense, yeah, in the most global visually sense. Why most people are not privy and knowledgeable about the tropical seaweed like this Cottonii that we're doing in Indonesia, it's because it's actually the byproduct is a carrageenan, right? That it's downstream process. It's actually an ingredient used, and it's not the final product. So I think industrial users industry users, whether from food to industry to whole body care and cosmetics, um, people don't really promote the use of carrageenan. They just promote the other things that they put inside. Well, they may call, I think a lot of cosmetics use seaweed in general, but there's so many other seaweeds that's actually being used. It's not just the Carrageenan, but other functions. And then generally speaking, seaweed is rich in its different seaweeds have different amino acid content and the vitamins involved in it. So I think there's definitely many benefits of using seaweeds. One thing, for example, I think in USA, American consumers have a lower deficiency count on iodine consumption, right? So if you want to counterbalance that, all you have to do is actually eat more seaweed-related products. Naturally, it has more iodine, which is helpful in some of your for health, basically.
Correct. Okay, so that actually brings up a question. I want to be mindful of our time and get the question from the audience. But so iodine, that of course, there's nascent iodine. There's a lot of ways to get iodine, including eating shrimp and fish and other stuff that comes from the ocean. But with what you're doing right now, if the majority of it comes from the Cottonii, species, these two species from the photos I see, then are those in any way, shape, or form, other than sodium alginate and carrageenan, do these seaweed also contain iodine at a sufficient percent or content level to be able to commercialize that in powder and ship to buyers?
I don't think the iodine, because they just don't. They have some content of it, but it's not really being applied yet. I think there's when we talk about the carrageenan or the seaweed that's being farmed in Indonesia, of course there's other uses for the product. One of them is actually the biostimulant, which is a natural-based fertilizer, or should I say, more sustainable fertilizer, in the coming years because of this war that's happening, and prices are going up, and then the world in general is looking for more sustainability. That's like one example, and then the other example would be the growing demand for what's when we talk about the meat that's being produced in the bioreactors, right? And then I think they're developing different medium products that will be needed in terms of like the carrageenan to produce this
substrates, right? The
right
Agar and
the substrate.
The 3D printed foods.
Correct.
And this. Okay. Understood.
Right.
So.
And once again, the industry as a consumer. Hey Trev, just as a highlight, one of the things about the carrageenan, it's not really being highlighted and really emphasized what a wow product is being used. It's always a secondary. It's quite instrumental and important. It's just not being highlighted enough, and not enough awareness that's being put out there. And while a lot of people are interested in seaweed farming, they just don't they can't really not really quite being able to connect the dots as to where the end users are. And I think an education part on that is important. And of course, localization on the farming, getting down to a more local level with the coastal communities and working with them, and to develop more sustainable practices and something that's more efficiently rewarding, that's adapted for the coastal communities. We don't want to mechanize too much because we're still, at the end of the day, dealing with coastal communities, families that are pretty elemental and very basic, and so we need to keep it simple. And then over time, I think the evolution will upgrade on its own. I think it has to go through that cycle of farming, I suppose, from where it is today to what we envision, like with the AI or mechanization and all that. That would be something down the line. Okay.
So one question from the audience is asking about farmers being able to cope with climate change and the increasing frequency of ice ages or many ice ages. Do you have anything to add to that?
What was the last thing you said? Ice ages?
Ice ages. Ice age, a future ice age.
Okay. I think I think generally speaking, there should be more parties from overseas or local investors that should be more actively involved. I think it's a great business to not only is it profitable, at the end of the day, you're basically farming a product that does not need fertilizer, right? And you're not ruining the environment. But as a matter of fact, you're actually improving that environment because
Right.
during its farming process, you're producing photosynthesis, and one of the byproducts is actually oxygen. So, is it good for environmental cleanup in the area that you're farming? The answer is yes. And is it relatively um, straightforward? Yeah, it is. And I think, yeah, a lot, there should be more people interested in seaweed farming. I've gotten a lot of requests, and but I think people just are not too sure, where to start or how to start. And even if they are able to start and farm, they have no avenue to sell. And if they don't fully comprehend where to sell and what the applications are, it's an incomplete business cycle of wanting to be an investor or a farmer. And in this day and age, I think you have to be more in totality in terms of understanding, from the initial farming aspects to maintaining the seed stock and getting more consistency farming, but at the same time very localized and still very low OPEX, and then delivering the results on a consistent basis.
I hear you. Yeah, well said. So with that, for everybody that's looking at these slides here, these are slides from the last few weeks that John has sort of sent over from his one project, which is actually just an hour north of Jakarta by boat ride. So is it possible in our last few minutes for you to talk about what you've been working on over there for really a few years now?
Right. So basically, where we used to farm in Rote in the east of Indonesia, that's quite far out. And myself coming from Western educated or growing up in USA, I think we're trying to balance not only our livelihoods but also our businesses. And so while I live in Jakarta, it's easy for me to have access to the Thousand Island region, where it's about an hour and a half by boat from Jakarta, and be able to farm there. Not only am I closer to the actual farm, but actually I can balance my life in having an urban environment livelihood, but at the same time being out in the farm where it's suitable to farm seaweed, right? And at the same time, it's also not ultra far in terms of logistical issues, trying to get the product from the island to Java main island, where you have the distribution hubs of the product prior to it being exported. So you're just trying to find and connect the dots in terms of fragmented, expensive logistics, like say in Papua versus somewhere that's closer. And then in total, when we talk about the OPEX, of course, it costs me more money to fly to Papua or East Indonesia, going there and back, versus me taking a boat and being out there in about an hour and a half, and then maybe stay a night and then staying a couple days, or you can come back at the same day and
Right.
get yeah. So overall, you have better experience as well. I think when we talk about coastal communities, that's the farmer. They could be anywhere in Indonesia because they're everywhere. But
Right.
as the entrepreneur, we want to be as close within, finding a balance between what we do and farming and finding that sweet spot, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so because you're a prolific poster on LinkedIn, so I know that all of the people that you're connected with, this is sort of how our world's, also thanks to LinkedIn, is a lot of interesting people that are commenting on your photos. But when you're posting a lot of these photos, it's always interesting to get a little bit closer to understanding why you've been doing all these trials across Indonesia, because you're probably been to most of the provinces, and it was very surprising when you provided a recent update in the last, basically half year, where you said, look, I'm going to be focused on a region that's not too far from Singapore or Jakarta. And even people are asking, well, is the water dirty or something like that? That's really not the case. It's within an hour and a half, you said, from Jakarta. All the investors that you've been engaging, can take that boat ride with you. They can touch it, they can feel it. And then, like you can see in these photos, your net pen strategy, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, is double-digit higher yield and operational efficiencies. And the actual HR element from also, I think you were saying that the HR element is that the caliber of people you're going to find within an hour, 2 hours of Jakarta is going to be a lot higher average education than somebody that's going to be, in one of the far outer provinces of Indonesia. People that really just have, honestly, very low level education in comparison, apples to apples.
Correct. Yeah, and then also, if I make a general comment and say, right outside of Jakarta Bay, we can assume that the water is more green and more higher in Chlorella and some of the other algae products, right? Which makes sense because there's a lot of runoff from the city.
Right.
But that being said, if you were to farm seaweed right off Jakarta Bay, you probably we can safely assume that the water is richer in nutrients, therefore the seaweed will grow faster. I think most people don't really realize that. And if we look at articles, why algae is used for wastewater is because wastewater is rich in nutrients. That's why the microalgae thrives there, right? And then they're developing different solutions for that. I'm not saying that to farm in Jakarta Bay. I don't farm in Jakarta Bay, but where I am, about an hour and a half, the water is crystal clear already, and it's still within proximity, not too far from Jakarta. If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, yes, that was really an interesting update when you were updating some of your folks across LinkedIn and just over in Jakarta. Because to have that proximity and for people to be able to just to fly in, and the airport is also sort of on this map here, go towards the water and then be able to witness what you've been sort of pioneering. I think that we've all been trying over the last few years to learn more about seaweed and seaweed farming, and every country is unique, every province is unique, and every down to the village level is also quite unique, depending on water rights and water access, the tides,
right,
water temperature, the seasonal rains. So there's so many variables to having successful sort of a consistent harvest every month or 35 days, as you said. So with the current business model, it's really just, I think it's shown some real great promise. I know that you continue to post photos. So with that being said, we're pretty much almost out of time. So do you have any sort of parting thoughts? I know that we are, for all of our viewers here on LinkedIn and other platforms, we have intentions to cover several other species of seaweed. We have intentions with Mr. Djiang Chan's company to discuss some other very exciting seafood and sushi type business models for future webinars, ideally here on LinkedIn. Any closing thoughts? People can obviously find you on LinkedIn. Do you have any final thoughts these last few minutes to close us out here?
A lot of people ask me, send me LinkedIn messages and whatnot. I think the best result is if you really want to get an in-depth, is to just fly yourself here and then come make an appointment, and then I can actually take you out there to really explain to you in real terms what we're talking about, having to farm in some of the environments where you can actually see the differential, and then just go from there. I mean, you can ask all the questions in the world, but if you're not pragmatic and not it's just theoretical, it's different than as opposed you're really getting out there and seeing some of the different results that we can get from.
Indeed. Well, lost him for a second. Wrapping up anyways. So with that being said, unless he joins, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Please do reach out to Djiang. At the bottom here is his contact information. So we shall leave it there for now. Wishing everybody happy holidays. Anything to add? I know you dropped off.
No, that's it. Yeah, sorry, I got dropped off. Yeah, sorry. No. Have a happy holiday, and feel free to drop Trav or myself any email, or maybe Trav, you can make a group chat for people that's interested, so we can exchange different views and thoughts and answer questions that everybody can get on a fast track learning curve. And maybe they want to apply it over at where they're at, or they want to come to Indonesia and figure if this is something that they're really interested in doing more sustainable aquaculture practices.
That's right. We will be inviting some guest PhDs, some guest business leaders that maybe we can have a call with several of us to sort of brainstorm on business models.
Sure.
So I think because of Jiang's just really tremendous network on LinkedIn, there's a lot of folks out there that now is the time that we're going to start planning calls. So please message him or myself to prepare a topic for the next call, so we can further explore our networks, because it's going to be, we envision a lot of ways to have business models scale from really zero, and it's been quite feasible. And from what he's done, it's already done, it has been done. So we're opening the door of opportunity for other folks to learn and contribute. So I guess with that, we should call it a day. Happy holidays. Djiang, anything else?
Yep. No, that's it. Happy holidays, everybody. And thank you, Trav, once again. And then yep. Okay.
Bye, everybody. See you soon.
All right. See you. Bye-bye.